Good morning, tubers. Welcome back for another adventure. So we're back on the 2000 Grizzly 600, and we managed to get this thing started, and we drove it on up here. So it has good potential. It's worth working on. The problem with it is electrically it is completely dead. There is nothing. There are no lights, no battery, no start, no crank, nothing, no spark. This thing electrically is completely dead, so we got to start troubleshooting that. So the first place to start is in the back here with the battery. And they got quite the monstrosity going on back here. Somebody put in a gel cell, and I have to admit I've done this, though the gel cells I used had bigger tabs on it, and I was able to drill a hole and actually bolt the leads directly to it. This gel cell is quite dead. If you test it, it's got about 2 volts on it. I might put it on a charger just for a laugh to see if it takes a charge, but let's call this dead and replace it. Okay, seats off. I plugged in another gel cell. By the way, it's always interesting the debris you find. As I was digging the leaves out, there were some dead fuses in here. I did find this. So, always interesting what's in there with the battery compartment. So, if I turn on the key, I get a whole lot of nothing. No neutral, no reverse. Normally these lights tend to flicker, so I have absolutely nothing. And I'm told it has a tendency to blow this fuse here, this 20 ampere. This one seems to stay alive. That one seems to blow. I think this guy does like the accessories. I think that's what this thing is doing. So you can see by the size of the wire and so forth, this is kind of more of the main fuse. Anyway, what we want to do is we want to measure the current going through that. It might be 0, right? If it's 0, that tells us one thing. If it's very high, that tells us something else. Now, I don't want to just smash my meter in series with this whole thing, basically replace that fuse with my meter, because my meter is good for 10 amps. If I then turn this thing on and it pulls 20 amps, my meter becomes the fuse, right? So I'd rather not have that happen. So I have a way around that. I actually put a headlight right in here, and let me show you. So using the headlight as the fuse, you guys could see that comes on, and it actually comes on very bright. This is a high and low beam headlight, and I mention that because that means it's got 2 filaments, and I have both filaments lighting up at the same time. I have everything off here, right, and the headlight comes on mighty bright. So this thing is pulling some pretty heavy amps, and I know that the maximum this thing will pull is like 7, just under 7, if I hook it directly to the battery. So now I can hook my meter up in series with this, and I know the maximum amount of amps is going to pull is 7. But by the way, I don't think this thing should be doing anywhere near that kind of ampage without the headlights on or anything else. By putting the meter in series and messing around with the switches, I'll be able to tell kind of what else is going on. So why don't we just do that? So here we are. We have the meter in series also, and you can see the headlight is quite bright, and we're drawing almost 6 amps, right? And you would say to yourself, well, if I turn the lights on, this should change, and it really doesn't, right? You guys can hear the clicking if I push the starter button, right? So on off. So it seems that this thing is pulling a relatively high amount of current and it's not doing anything. For those of you who like schematics, it's schematic time. So here's the schematic for this thing, and I'm really just talking about the 12-volt circuitry and the fuse that's being blown and so forth, right? This isn't everything, and this is as much as I can draw from memory. Now, it only draws power when this key switch is on. Here's the fuse that's blowing, here's the battery. So given that it only draws when this key switch is on, I'm not thinking this starter solenoid situation is part of the load. So you can actually delete that from your mind. We'll leave it in the diagram for now. So it goes up through here, and this is the fuse that's blowing. And we know it only, or it's drawing a lot of current. And we know it only happens when you turn this key switch on, it draws current, and you turn it off, and it stops drawing current. Well, what is hooked to this key switch? You got the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive. It's electronic in this thing. You push a little button on the handlebars, and I believe it pushes the solenoid in and removes the solenoid when you're in two-wheel drive, or vice versa. Anyway, so you have that coming off the key switch. You have cooling fans. Normally those are direct drive. There's a thermostat that turns them on and off, right? And so you got the cooling fans. You have accessories. I'd show you that accessory plug, that black plug hanging off the front of it. I believe that's direct drive off the key switch. Maybe not. It might be running directly off that second fuse such that you can run accessories without turning on the all-terrain vehicle. But either way, I just threw it in here for completeness. And then you have the handlebar switches, which control the CDI, the lights, and the starter. That's the starter button right there. So you have all that stuff. Now, as we go through this, we should be able to disconnect these. There should be a connector for the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive, right? And there should be a connector for the handlebar switches. So once we unplug those, we could see what kind of current we're drawing, right? To see if, you know, perhaps there's a short within this key switch or within this two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive situation. So let's go unplug those and take a look at it and see what kind of current we're drawing. All those wires are located beneath the speedo cap or dashboard, whatever you want to call this. And for this one, you know, it doesn't bolt down. You got to kind of wiggle it and pull it back and kind of move it out of the way the best you can. Generally speaking, they're difficult to take off, and they're even harder to put back on in a good way. I'm seeing like these wires here that look like an add-on, and they go to the hand grips. So I guess this thing has heated hand grips. We'll call that accessory also, that goes off the off the key switch. So it might not be a bad thing to just cut those loose. I do not plan on using the heated hand grips. Or if I do, what I'll do is I'll cut the wires in such a way that I can hook them up again, right? I won't just slice them off right here. This is kind of the important one, right? You can put that hand in your pocket for a few minutes. I see some other wiring wonders here, right? You gotta love it when you see wires chafed off and other wires capped. And yeah, we got some interesting stuff going on here too, right? Yeah, when you see stuff like that, you want to disconnect those, right? Maybe I'll be lucky and it'll be easy enough that I just have to clean that up a little bit. Anyhow, if you follow wires from the, the key switch, and Okay, this one goes up to the handlebar, so if I unplug this, right, I have the handlebars loose, and then I think this guy, yeah, this guy goes to the key switch. I think it's going to be a two-hander to unplug, so I'll unplug that and we'll take a look at the current. Okay, so I disconnected the two-wheel drive, four-wheel drive switch. So that's been unplugged. And I disconnected the what is that? The left-hand switches, lights on and off and all that trivia. So they're unplugged. And now if you check the current, you guys could see it's right the same as it was. So it didn't drop the current at all. So back to the schematic for you folks who love these things, right? So you turn the switch on. I removed all this. This is as good as gone because I've unplugged it and I removed that. So what we have still in the circuit are the cooling fans and the accessories. Part of those accessories are the dashboard lights, neutral, reverse, that kind of trivia. So, right, what happens is, in the case of the neutral light, picture this as a light bulb, right? So you have power right to the light bulb, and when you put it in reverse or forward, it just, shorts that to ground, which lights up your light bulb. So I could have something shorted up in the dashboard as, let's call it, part of the accessories. Anyway, I'm a little, quite honestly, you probably hear it in my voice, I'm a little bit surprised that removing both those blocks didn't clear the short circuit. Okay, so the unplugging spree continues. I unplugged those lights and checked them. They didn't make any difference. This is dashboard is unplugged. Let's go together. This is, that switch is unplugged. These here, they actually made a difference. They dropped the amperage down. Those are actually these two, right? They're unplugged. Yep. No. Those two actually go up to this thing. They're unplugged, and they actually drop the amperage down like 1 3/4 amps. I unplugged the fan underneath. So I unplugged all that, and when you turn it on, right, you're still getting over 4 amps. So it's pulling 4 amps. You can see that light bulb is pretty bright. Right, it was pulling almost 6, so I think there were a set of lights on, to illuminate the speedometer. So we go back to the diagram. This has been completely eliminated, and I took the cooling fan out. The thermostat is still hooked up. The thermo switch is still hooked up. Accessories, I've kind of disconnected some of those, and once again I'm still pulling 4 amps. So I've just hit a decision point. I ordered the book for this thing so I could go through the schematics on the book to make sure that nothing strange is going on. And you might be saying, why would you even think there's something strange going on? And I'm going to answer the question like this. Like, what is that resistor doing there? And why is it unplugged, and why don't I see any wires going to it? Right? That's kind of a strange thing. So I need the book to kind of figure out what that is, and I'm a little nervous about doing too much hacking on this before I do that. From a key switch point of view, given that none of this stuff is in trouble, right, I can theoretically cut this wire here, and hook it directly to the key switch, right? Get the fuse back in there, and that'll turn on all those key switch functions, right? I can theoretically, with that same thing, right, just have a power line coming out of the key switch. I can do the 2-wheel and 4-wheel drive, and as a matter of fact, I think I found the thermostat for the fan, and it seems to be hanging in the breeze. So I think I might just, the fan bearings feel okay. Feels pretty high quality, right? I don't feel any weeble wobble in the fan blade or anything. So I could probably, just for firing it up, once you turn the power on, the fan kicks right on. So I can have like all the important stuff by just a couple of cuts and splices. But I would really rather not do that. I can also rig up the starting solenoid here, that the only time you can engage the starting solenoid is when you are in neutral. So I could set that up. But this thing also has a recoil, right? So unless there's something logical going on here, some logical decision to be made, one would be able to start it in forward or reverse with the recoil, right? You reach up, grab the throttle, pull that, right? You won't be able to engage the electric starter, but you would be able to use the manual starter. So I mean, I could kind of put some of the safety back into it. I'm also wondering if this current draw isn't the fact that once you turn on the switch, unless it finds all the wiring to be happy, all the interlocks to be happy, right? There's some circuitry that makes that decision, some logic circuitry, some relays. I'm wondering if that's where the problem may be, right? That might be blown up. The issue you have when you got wiring that looks like that, for whatever reason, the battery might have been going dead. It might just be the battery was old and going dead, but they blamed the all-terrain vehicle, so they were disconnecting it, and then they went with that quick connect thing, and somebody hooked up something backwards. Well, if you do that, depending on what's making the decision, and this is a 2000, there were some electronics around by then, something could have got cooked, which is now a load, and which is now also why I cannot power things up. Anyway, I really hate to do this to you guys, and I'm going to call it troubleshooting because the troubleshooting I used was valid. It's just a matter of when you work on them, go through that troubleshooting, and hopefully you can isolate what your problem is. So that is valid. Unfortunately for this thing, it's going to need the next level, which is going to require the manual. I'm going to have to go through the schematics in the manual and see if I can find out what its problem is. I basically have to find everywhere the power comes off the switch. I want to mention here in the video, I also disconnected the power switch and the power went to 0, right? If you disconnect that, you draw 0 power. And I also checked the switch with a multimeter to make sure it wasn't doing strange ground things when you turned it on and off, right? It wasn't grounding. 6 amps or now 4 amps. That's an interesting number, though. Your typical light on those things pulls a couple of amps, but I know the headlights aren't on. Relays typically put the input to a relay, typically they're low, 1/4 amp. So I'm just in my mind, I'm rattling it around and I'm not picturing what it could be, and I've disconnected everything I could disconnect, so I can't go further with that. I could hack it. That's the one good thing. I know, as I was going through the wiring, I know exactly where I would do those splices and dices to bring it all together. So I could do that, you know, just run a red wire with, you know, four little legs coming off of it and hook up each one of the legs on here, right? I could get it running that way. One would hardly notice it. Then I could work, you know, the starter relay. I can find the neutral switch and hook that up, right, for the starting solenoid ground. I mean, that's all easy. That's a matter of minutes. It's the troubleshooting it that is going to take some time. Anyway, once again, if you find yourself in this situation, I gave you a way of troubleshooting it, and I gave you a way of hacking it, though I don't recommend hacking. Try to keep things as original as possible, even though that thing is now a 20-year-old all-terrain vehicle. Anyhow, I want to thank you all for dropping by to watch and comment, subscribe. Please remember to keep your feet down, your heads up, and get out and enjoy each and every day. Bye now.